Hello. Today, I'm here to introduce a novel with a roller coaster of a plot. The female protagonist, 𝐿𝐤 feels as if she's wrapped in a farce. She possesses a mysterious golden power of unknown origin, and the townspeople, driven by curiosity and fear, subject her to endless examinations and interrogations. To make matters worse, something incredible happened between her and the King of the North. She was told she might be the king's mate, yet he vanished without a trace, leaving her with a pile of mysteries. Is she truly the king's mate? And why is the king avoiding her? These questions are irresistible. So follow along with me to uncover the truth. Chapter 4. It had been 3 weeks since my encounter with the King of the North, and I was beginning to doubt I'd ever see him again. During this time, I found myself subjected to endless examinations by the village's limited medical staff. The entire town was aware of my gold, power, and its healing capabilities, but no one, least of all myself, understood its true nature or origin. The memory of the last time I'd used my power saving a young girl who had ventured too close to the town's central fire was still fresh in everyone's mind. Now I felt like a specimen under a microscope, dissected and analyzed as they tried to decipher why this power seemed so intent on connecting me to the king. The process was utterly draining. When I was at the healing shop or enduring tedious interrogations from the elders, I was essentially confined to my room, only permitted to leave with an approved escort. The situation was unbearable. It seemed as though everyone's trust in me had evaporated, or perhaps they feared what I might be capable of. They failed to understand that I was still the same 𝐿𝐤, just one who couldn't control the force within her and was supposedly mated to the king. The King of the North, my mate. The notion seemed absurd. Since childhood, I'd been told that someone like me could never have a mate, but the elders had never been wrong before, so perhaps it was the king who was mistaken. What could he possibly gain from claiming me? The gold power. If he was willing to endure all this mockery for some unexplored magic, he was welcome to it. After all, it seemed more drawn to him than to me, considering how it had nearly killed me. My knowledge of mates was limited, but I couldn't help wondering what kind of mate would abandon their partner for weeks without a second thought. The king's absence only fueled my skepticism and frustration. 𝐿𝐤 voice pulled me from my brooding thoughts. I turned from the window, where I'd been staring at the dark trees beyond, to see him standing in my open doorway. His forehead creased with concern. "What is it?" I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. While I knew it was 𝐿𝐤's fault that had been condemned to this isolated existence, I couldn't shake the feeling that he could have done more to prevent it. My once comfortable home now felt like a prison, and I felt like a newly discovered species that everyone was eager to dissect and study. It was maddening. His dark eyes turned their gaze out the window I was perched against as his rather large body leaned against the old wooden door frame. He and his sister were the same kind of shifter. Their whole family was, and their bodies were built more lean and toned to fit their animal than other shifters were. Like the family that shifted into bears on the other side of town, they were more large and hairy than anything. The heavy snow will be falling soon. I want to leave for the lower kingdom before then. I'm still going. His eyes flickered down to mine and he raised a dark eyebrow. "Why wouldn't you?" I shrugged my shoulders and turned my gaze back out the rather dirty window. The famous dark clouds of the northern snow storms were starting to roll in over the horizon, and the wind was quickly beginning to carry the fallen leaves down the mountainside in a cascade. Light snow always fell before the end of fall, and then the dense cold of winter hit. We had barely a few weeks before then. I grew up at the base of the mountain with May and her family. We were used to snow and the cold, but for some reason, the three of us always went to the lower kingdom during the heavy snow times. I can't remember a time where we spent the entire winter at the village. Only the warm waters of the lower kingdom filled my mind, because I've been on lock and key for the past 3 weeks. They let out a small sigh before leaning off the door to walk further into my rather small and cramped room. "This is for your protection." I thought you understood that." His voice said really, just tired as he took a seat on the bottom of my bed and rested his lithe body back on his hands. I tried not to roll my eyes. I understand this is more to study me than protect me. He stayed silent for a few long moments before reaching up to run a hand through his hair, which is why I thought you would be excited about our annual trip. You know I love the snow. I grumbled as my eyes danced back at the window. I truly did love the snow. And the cold. The lower kingdom was beautiful and lovely, but it was warm all year long. I hadn't experienced an northern mountain winter since I was a child. Yes, but this trip is needed now more than ever. His voice was low, soft, as it floated around the small wooden room. I could sense the hesitancy in it. The worry? This was about more than just the gold power. You shouldn't worry so much. 𝐿𝐲, I doubt what they say is true. He shot me a small smile before glancing out my open door. Yeah. I gave him a soft, sad tilt of my lips as he stood and headed for the dimly lit hall. The first snowfall should be tonight. I'm sure the guards will be getting an early sleep. He gave me a pointed look with those dark eyes of his before he shot me a sly smile and disappeared down the hall. I couldn't help but smile after him. 𝐊𝐲 had been the only family May and I knew since we were children. I never knew my parents, and theirs died before May could know them. It had been the three of us for years. The orphans in charge of one of the king of the North's many towns. 𝐿𝐲 took care of us. He always did. Things changed that night, and I wasn't sure if it was for the better. 𝐊𝐲 was right. The first fall of the heavy snow began barely an hour after he left my room, and the guard stationed at my door was nowhere to be seen. I couldn't keep the smile off my face as I slipped on the snow, proof shoes May had bought me for my birthday, and threw my thing cover over my night shirt. My favorite thing about the fresh fall was watching my feet leave prints in the clean street. I watched my breath fog into the night air as I walked down the main road with slow, purposeful steps. I sighed and walked further towards the entrance of town. Everything was just so confusing now. I wished I never had listened to that nagging voice in the back of my head. I wished I'd just stayed put in the village, or went down to the water with May. My mind has been in turmoil ever since I locked eyes with those electrifying blue ones, ever since the gold power tried to use me get to him. I needed to get out of the village for a while, even if it was only for a few minutes. The closely laid houses and strong stench of livestock was making my head spin. Maybe this trip to the lower kingdom would be good for me. Clear my head, making me stop thinking about him. These thoughts, these worries over just a maybe was making my head spin in more ways than one. The entrance gate was too large. Wooden doors that stood proudly against the corresponding fence. It was built before my time, before the king of the north and his soldiers chased the northern raiders and outlaws from the mountain. Now we kept it as some form of comfort, mainly against the king himself. 𝐿𝐲 never hidden the fact he wasn't particularly fond of any village besides his own. I let out a long sigh. Why was I still pondering this? Why did I even care? It's been weeks since the last and first time I ever saw him. If he was so convinced I was his mate, why would he leave me for so long? Why would he give me back to begin with? But did it even matter? I didn't walk far outside the gates, maybe a few feet, but as soon as I did I felt the shift in the air, felt a tingle of fear shoot down my spine like a few weeks before. My eyes flickered out across the dark trees and shadows of the thick forest. Wolf-borns. I now knew they were real, knew most of the rumors were true. And one of them was watching me. The king was watching me. I froze the minute those strange electrifying blue eyes caught mine. My breath caught in my throat. He was 𝐊𝐲𝐻𝐻. He blinked and I felt my feet walk closer to the two glowing orbs shining brightly in the darkness on their own. I forced myself to stop at the beginning of the dense, dark trees. What are you doing here? My soft voice filled the silence and terror around us as the snow gently fell from the sky. Those abnormally bright eyes blinked. I watched them carefully with a narrowed brow as he took one step back, then another. I couldn't see the rest of his body through the dark of the woods, but his eyes grew smaller as he edged away from the village. I'm not going in there, I stated firmly as my gaze washed over the silent trees. I was only brave enough to go in there during the day with May. No way did I want to go in there at night. Those eyes hardened in warning, but I only shook my head. I winced when he let out a low growl, but forced myself to stand my ground. If you want to talk, come out here. I didn't know why I suddenly felt brave enough to talk like that to him, to the king of the north. Maybe because I knew he was in his wolf form, or maybe because some part of me, deep down, knew he would never hurt me, but whatever it was, it wouldn't let me run back into the safety of the village. He snarled low in his throat and took another step back. I raised my head high, kept my back straight, like that would prove to him I wasn't the scared, frightened little girl I really was. With one last blink, those agonizingly beautiful blue eyes vanished, and I was left staring into the darkness of the northern woods. I sighed. Well, it was the reunion I imagined, not that I actually thought we would ever see each other again. I slowly started to turn around, ready to head back to the light of the village, when a thick tree branch shot out of nowhere and wrapped around my waist. What the shit? Be quiet. I froze. That voice. I knew that voice, that tone. It rang like a dark lullaby through my mind, my dreams, and promised a lift, time a warmth I never knew. I went limp in what I now found was the king's insanely large arm, and not a generous rebranch, as he gently eased me back into the dark shadows of the trees. What are you doing? I gasped as he dragged he wanted me to go. The thick grip he had on my waist was leaving me breathless, and making me crave things I never had before. I tried not to make it too obvious I was leaning back into the strong warmth of his large chest. You wanted to talk. Right. His voice was gruff, deep, and just as beautiful as the one drifting through my dreams, but the only problem was that I could not remember, for the life of me, where I had heard it before. Yeah. Before I realized what was happening. That large arm wrapped around my waist lifted me over a large tree root stuck in the ground like I weighed nothing. He grunted as he stepped over it after me. God, you're so fucking tiny. He growled under his breath as he pretty much carried me wherever we were going. No, you're just abnormally large. He turned me towards him just enough to see a appalled look those glowing eyes shot me. It actually brought a small laugh to my lips. All wolf-born are naturally big. He growled as he carried me deeper into the very same forest I told him I was going into. Yes, the men in your town seemed very large as well, but you are literally the most generous person I have ever seen. I tilted my head back enough to blink up at that face hidden in the shadows of the night, and tried to give him a small smile as those bright eyes shot me a dark glare. But then I watched in amazement as a small smile touched his own lips. I couldn't tell much from the dark, but that smile alone was beautiful. I'm going to take that as a compliment. I shrugged even though it was kind of hard to with how he was carrying me. I told you that I didn't want to go in here. I grumbled instead as the lights from my village faded behind us. I wasn't necessarily sure what was going on, or where we were going, but I wasn't afraid. Not like I should be. Not like any normal person would be in the presence of the king. I didn't even know his real name, and I felt like the safest person in the world. And I told you not to be a weakling, and you were coming in one way or another. He snarled in answer, and I could only gape up at him as he finally pulled us to a stop a good mile, or so from the village. The woods stayed drearily silent around us. You did no such thing. I mumbled as he set me gingerly, surprisingly, down on my feet. My head barely reached the build of his broad chest, but chest so big it was the size of two of me combined. Yes, I did. You just weren't listening. You were a wolf, so. I glared up at his hidden face like he was crazy, but he just gave me an indifferent scoff. How am I supposed to know what you try to say when you're a wolf? You did just fine the other week. That was different. You were hurt, and I basically asked you only yes or no questions. He rolled those beautiful eyes at me. Same difference. I glared up at him, but that glowing gaze just shined down at me in amusement. I huffed and forced mine to glance away. What are you doing here? I asked again as the giant man, who the elders apparently thought was my mate, slowly circled the space around me like a predator, stalking its prey. He was standing too close for comfort. Even if my body reacted in strange ways at the proximity, I was curious. His voice was a deep baritone that shook the very fabric of my being. I tried not to let my breath catch in my throat. I could feel those intense, beautiful eyes of his watching me as he continued to walk, like he was assessing every inch of me. It made me fidget uneasily where I stood. It felt like hours when he finally stopped his circling, but only a minute or two had passed. I watched quietly as he stood in front of me, those unearthly eyes locking with mine once again. Just like the other day, we stayed stuck in that soul-gazing stare. A stare that froze my insides and made my stomach tighten but a beautiful stare nonetheless. We stood silently for forever, not touching, not talking, just staring. It was weird how natural it felt to just stand there all day and gaze up at those abnormally gorgeous eyes. The elders tell me we're mates. 𝐿𝐤 helped my whispered voice from sliding unwelcomed into the silence surrounding the forest. But it didn't break our trance. If anything, I felt like I was drowning further and further into him, just like his wolf. He blinked and tilted his head curiously to the side. He sure did do that often. Do you not believe them? Even though his voice was soft, there was no masking the obvious authority ringing through it. He was 100%. Completely royal. For the first time since his wolf jumped me, I felt nerves over his being start tugging at my resolve. But 𝐿𝐤 didn't look away from him. I don't know what to believe. I admitted quietly and watched from the corner of my eye how his muscles shifted under his skin. I hadn't been that truthful in weeks, months, but there was just something about him that forced the truth from my lips. He rolled his shoulders as if they were tense. You can't feel it. Those bright eyes narrowed in confusion, and I frowned at the small one that creased his brow. It was hard to make out much of his features, but from what I could tell from the faint light of the moon, he was absolutely gorgeous. His jawline was sharp, his hair was dark, and his eyes glowed brighter than the moon. I feel something, but I don't know what. I finally broke my gaze from that intense stare and glanced out at the dark trees surrounding us. If anything, I was more confused than ever. Our brief encounter in these very woods weeks before replayed constantly in my brain in the lonely hours of the day, and his beautiful voice haunted my dreams. And now these weird feelings turning at the base of my stomach with just one simple touch from the king was only making the confusion 10 times worse. They never told me I let my voice trail off, because I honestly wasn't sure how to approach the topic. It was almost embarrassing to admit how I had no idea about the mechanism behind mates, or how they were even a thing. A frown pulled at the features of his face I could see, and I resisted the small pout that wanted to tug on my own. He shouldn't frown. I didn't want him to. Talking about this was making him happy. That beautiful, vibration-sending voice of his was gruff in disbelief in what also sounded like anger. My face flushed for some reason beyond me. I know what they are, but they never taught me anything about them, or what the signs were. He took a step towards me as that frown once again turned to a look of confusion. My eyes wandered back to the ones that were calling me. Why not? He was getting frustrated now. I could tell, but I could also tell that frustration was directed at me, and I wasn't sure how. My flushed face turned into an embarrassed blush and I broke my gaze from his once again. I licked my lips and stared at the bear. Ginormous, buff chest just inches in front of me. His skin was toned, tight, and rather tan despite the dark atmosphere of his home on the top of the mountain. It was supposed to be impossible for me to have a mate. I muttered softly as the silent forest surrounding us slowly started to come to life once again. He took a step towards me, and even though my brain told me to step away, that nagging voice in my head that got me into trouble to begin with told me to stay put. I jumped when his giant palm cupped my chin, an entire jaw, and forced my gaze up to his eye. For a moment, all I could do was stare up into that intense gaze as the warmth of his giant hand shot through every inch of me. The tingling, electric feeling started at the base of my chin and shot through the rest of my body until all I could feel were pins and needles. They said it was only possible for shifters to have mates. I am not a shifter. He stared at me curiously for a few good seconds before the hand gripping my jaw gently forced my head into the air. I gasped as he lowered his face into my neck and took a deep breath. Paused. Then took another. He pulled back a minute later and his bright eyes gleamed down at my shocked ones. You smell like one. His voice was gruff once again as he relaxed his hold on my jaw. I lived with them. They raised me. I'm bound to smell like one. Tingles shot straight from his thumb and down my body in a sharp jolt as he rubbed it along my jaw. I couldn't help but lean further into him. I resisted the disapproving groan that clogged my throat as his hand slowly left my chin. Were your parents not shifters? My eyes dropped to the ground at his question, and I resisted the urge to tip my jaw. I don't know. I've never met them. The leader of the town and his family raised me, but they couldn't have been right. If I can't shift, they shouldn't have been able to either. He shrugged and glanced around the dark woods surrounding us from all sides like the situation was that big of a deal. It's not common for some shifters to produce dormant offspring, but it has happened before. Do you think we're mates? I asked nervously as he reached up and ran that huge hand through hair I couldn't see in the darkness, but oh how I wished I could. I know we are. His voice came out in what sounded like a dark growl, and that made my insides twist almost painfully. I could feel the fear of was it rejection? Of not worth. I couldn't pinpoint the fear. It was just there, and it was so different from my I didn't care attitude of earlier. Do you not want that? My voice came out as weak and small as I felt at that moment. I was only surprised I was able to keep the fear I was feeling from it. This was an odd experience for me. An odd feeling, and I didn't like it. Not one bit. What was he doing to me? I never wanted a mate. He grumbled and took a step away from 𝐊𝐻𝐻. I muttered softly and dropped my eyes to the ground as his continued to glance off to the side of us. I guess I was right about earlier. About why he didn't bring me to his village, his home. He didn't want me. He didn't want a mate. I don't know why I let that hurt me, why I let that knowledge leave a painful hole in the middle of my chest. I lived my whole life believing I would never have a mate. Never have that earth-shatter soul, connection with someone, and I never let it bother me. Just because I suddenly had one that didn't want me, didn't mean I was going to let it upset me now. I never had any hope in the matter to begin with. I always believed I was strong enough to turn her away, if I actually had one. His voice was dark, and low as its awfully filled the small space between us. My arms wrapped protectively around my stomach, like it was readying it for the rejection it knew was coming. But I couldn't let it bother me. I wouldn't. My men seemed so confident when it came to their mates. They made it seem so natural. Like falling in love was as easy as breathing. I figured it would be just as easy to make sure I didn't. He paused for a moment and licked those beautiful lips that I could barely see. I really didn't want to stand there and listen to this. As much as I loved listening to his voice, I wished he would just hurry up and get it over with. I no longer wanted to make footprints in the snow or embrace the freezing temperature. I just wanted to curl up in my bed, forget about this whole situation, and move on with my life. I was never supposed to have him anyways. I was wrong. He grumbled softly a moment later. My eyes snapped up to him as he sighed a heavy sigh that sounded almost like a groan, his big hands pushing into his closed eyes. A frown tugged at my lips as I watched the inner turmoil pull at his body. I wasn't exactly sure what he was trying to say, but I didn't like the anguish it was causing him. No one told me it would feel like this. His words came out in a dark snarl that shot through me like lightning. I'm confused. I muttered into the air around us, but he just let out a tired sigh. I never wanted a mate. Ever until I saw you on top of that roof. I tried to squash the hope that ignited in my chest. Just because he changed his mind didn't mean that our situation would change. He could still push me away, and I still wasn't exactly sure how this was possible. Why I suddenly wanted it to be possible. And you want me now? I asked softly as he rubbed a hand down his face, the face that was almost completely hidden in shadow. I don't know what I want. He grumbled as a fresh wave of snow started falling from the sky and through the bare branches of the mountainous trees. But I do know what I don't want. and I don't want you in my life." His answer only confused me more, and I'm sure he could tell by the small frown that graced my lips. I rubbed my hands along my arms in almost a soothing way. I wasn't sure what to make of the whole situation, what to feel. "This is coming out horribly. I'm sorry." I think I was as shocked as he was at the apology. The King of the North was not known to ever apologize, or show any remorse or mercy, and I could tell we were both thinking the same thing. That was the first time he had ever said sorry in a very long time, or at all. "It's okay. I think I understand." "No, you don't. I can see that you don't." He snarled and took another few frustrated steps back. "Mates are weak. They make you weak. Traitors would use you against me. My enemies would threaten to take you from me. My being would be solely focused on protecting you. You, this little, tiny, breakable thing that I could crush with one wrong touch, hey? I'm not that fragile." I didn't even get to finish my sentence before he flashed in front of me. One large, massive hand clutching at my throat. His beautiful blue eyes were glowing in an anger that appeared so dangerous it should have frightened the living daylights out of me, but it didn't. One squeeze, little girl, and your neck would snap in half. You are dangerously fragile. His voice was a dark growl I had yet to hear, a growl that suggested that creature inside of him was working hard to take over. I gulped as the pressure around my neck tightened, but it wasn't enough to cut off any air. "But you won't." I gasped softly and gripped at the thick wrist attached to the hand around my throat. "You won't squeeze." And I was right. We both knew it. He wouldn't kill me. He could never kill me. This thing between us would never let him. That doesn't lessen my point. He growled in my face as his hand pulled me closer towards him. That I'm a weak, fragile, incompetent being. Yes, I get that. I cowed and hid that small amount of hurt that snuck into my shaking voice. Just because he spoke the truth didn't mean that it didn't hurt. I watched as those beautiful blue eyes softened and his hand eased away from my neck. "I never said you were weak and incompetent, little one. You might as well have." I grumbled as I reached up and rubbed the spot his hand had just left. His presence was so large and fierce that I was almost sure I would feel his phantom touch for a long while to come. His beautiful lips pulled into a small frown once again. "You are my mate. Despite your size, I highly doubt you're incompetent. Despite my size, my butt. But I can still be weak." "Right." My tone was sarcastic, but that didn't stop a smile from tugging on his lips. "Physically, yes. I don't think so up here, though." He tapped my forehead gently and I cowed and helped the small smile of my own. Then it slowly faded. "So where does that leave this, whatever this is between us?" I gestured between us and sadly watched as his bright eyes dimmed. He slowly reached up with one hand and cupped it around the back of mine that I still held in the air. He wasn't holding my hand, just kind of cupping his palm around its back. My hand looked like that of a small child's compared to his. It sent shivers down my spine. There are things I have to deal with, matters I must take care of, before anyone can even learn about you. He muttered softly as his giant hand closed around mine, making both into a gentle fist. He paused and let out a heavy breath as his thumb rubbed against the bottom of my palm. "No matter how badly this ache inside of me is telling me to take you back with me, I can't. Not for a long while at least." I frowned, but stayed silent as he opened our hands again. "I'm not in a good position for anyone to know about you." His gruff voice came out in a soft whisper, almost as if he was pleading with me to understand. He didn't have to, though. If he didn't want me going with him, then I wouldn't put up a fight. I never really planned on anything. Honestly, I was surprised he was even telling me some part of him actually wanted me. "Then what do we do?" I asked softly as the warmth from his hand disappeared. I resisted the urge to reach out and grab for it as it dropped to his side. "I'm going to take you back to that little village of yours. And you're going to stay there where I know you will be safe while I go back up the mountain." He was standing a few feet away from me now and my eyes caught on the black shorts covering his lower half. I didn't like him standing so far away. 𝐿𝐻𝐿dn't feel his warmth. 𝐿𝐻𝐿dn't stare up into his eyes. And 𝐿𝐻𝐿dn't help this feeling of abandonment flowing through me. Will I ever see you? I was ashamed of the weak, wold whisper that passed my lips. I felt like he could hear all of my fears in that simple statement. But if he did, he didn't comment. His beautiful blue eyes stared holes into my head as I wrapped my arms tight around his stomach and stared at the ground. I do not think I could stay away from you long if I tried. I blushed at the relieved sigh that rushed past my lips. Before I knew what was happening, I was lifted straight off the ground and into his giant, warm chest. At first, I was surprised at the awkward hug, until he forced my legs around his waist and began carrying me. What are you doing? I actually laughed as he stepped over that thick branch from before and began the slow walk back to my village. Carrying you. His tone sounded almost as confused as mine did, like he didn't understand why I would even ask. Is this like a wolf-born thing or something? His thick tree trunk like arm rested under me like a chair as his other moved branches out of our path. He grunted and slanted those bright blue eyes at me. Yes, but it is only meant for our mates and young. Do the underlings not carry their females? Underlings. The look he shot me was one of disbelief, like it was a completely ridiculous notion of me to not understand these things. It took him a minute to answer. Forgive me, small one. I forget other shifters have different customs and cultures than ours. His arm raised me up higher until I could loosely wrap my arms around his thick neck. Underlings are what we call shifters who are not wolf-born, because they live under the mountain. No, they don't. Some just live at the base of it. He chuckled at the confused look on my face as the lights from the village started flickering ahead once again. I held on tighter to him as we drew closer. I didn't understand the panic that suddenly filled my chest, or this desperate need to cling on to him as tightly as I could. I didn't want him to go. We think anyone who does not live at the top of the mountain are under it. It's an old phrase. Oh, I muttered as I tried to discreetly snuggle into the warmth of his chest. No, the underlings don't often carry their mates. Maybe once in a while, but it's more or less for fun. He made a noise in the back of his throat that had me glancing up at him curiously. How odd. He grumbled as he finally stopped walking when we were a few feet from the edge of the forest. He set me carefully down on my feet. And despite the voice in my head nagging at me to never let him go, I reluctantly unwrapped my arms from around his neck. Don't forget what I said. Stay in your village until I see you again. His heavy hand was resting on my shoulder, like an older being scolding a child. When will that be? His bright eyes flashed and he glanced away. I'm not sure, but it won't be too terribly long. We have much more to talk about. Do I meet you halfway or something? He chuckled and shook his head. No, I will come here. If I can't leave the village, how will I know you're here? You will know, but... The look he shot me with those intoxicating eyes was enough to silence any objections. I slowly closed my mouth and watched as he took a small step towards me. My breath caught in my throat as one giant, thick hand slowly reached up and ran its thumb along the base of my jaw. His bright blue eyes followed the gentle action. Do not worry. My little witch, my little one. You'll know. I barely had time to process his words, much less his actions, before he turned and retreated back into the dark of the forest. I stood there for whoever knows how long, silently praying for him to return, secretly wishing beyond all hope to go with him. Chapter 5. Days slowly went by after my encounter with the king. Long days that gradually turned into even longer weeks. The heavy snow had finally started to fall, and they wanted to leave for the lower kingdom in the next day or two. I was nervous, ridiculously so, even though I knew I had no reason to be. The king of the north had told me not to leave the town, and our annual trip hadn't even crossed my mind during our entire conversation. But it's been 2 weeks since then, and I hadn't seen a wink of him. Did I honestly expect to? I knew he said he wouldn't stay away for long, but the look in his beautiful eyes suggested otherwise. I wouldn't be surprised if I never saw him again, and that fact hurt. I put on a smile around May, talked to Lay when he stopped by, but my elder, appointed escort still followed me everywhere, and I walked around the village like one of the dead. But the maddening part was that I couldn't help it. My mind was constantly revolving around him, around his eyes, the warmth of his skin, the strong feeling of his arms. It never gave me a reprieve. I was forced to dream of his voice, replay our encounter in the forest over and over again, like my own soul was taunting me over the fact that we couldn't be. Not yet. At least, that was what the King of the North told me. Not yet. Then when? May would follow the garden eye around occasionally, offering to start a conversation or go do something more fun outside the walls. But every time I started to agree, the king's command rang through my head. Stay in your village until I see you. But I had no idea when that would be, or if I ever would. That night, after my guard had fallen asleep outside my door, I found myself wandering the perimeter of the village. I had done this a couple of times since the encounter in the woods, and I always seemed to teeter on the edge of breaking his command, on stepping just 1 foot out of the village, to see what would happen. Would he know? Would he even care? I was never supposed to have him, and he never wanted me. Did we even have a future? I didn't know what this feeling was. His emotional tug pulling me towards his territory. His castle him. I didn't know how much longer it would let me obey his demand. All I wanted to do was run back up that mountain, and I'm not sure what. But I knew that I needed to see him again. And that scared me. Was it me that wanted to be with him so badly, or the gold power? I felt it stir deep within my chest a few times since I met him in the woods. But every time one of the town's healers or elders prodded at me, it disappeared, and it was all I could do to shove it down. I was terrified of the power now, terrified of what it could do to me. It was the middle of the night, and most of the village was sleeping when I finally decided to cross into the forest. It didn't really matter anyways. I've crossed out of the village numerous times before, and no harm had ever found me, besides sneaking into his town. I doubted any would now. A part of me did fear the northern woods, especially now when I was venturing in on my own. But this was the only time I had to be by myself. My escort would not let me leave the town, and neither the elders or lay would allow me back into the forest. Holding my resolve and facing my fear was the only way I would be free of that place, even if it was just for a few brief moments. The dark trees and shadows that welcomed me was almost refreshing. Despite my hesitation, I breathed in the fresh air and the cold snow of the mountain. The frigidness filled my chest and came out as a hot breath, but I loved it. I was starting to dread the upcoming trip to the lower kingdom, for more reasons than one. I found myself tracing the King of the North's phantom footsteps back to the little spot where he had taken me all those days ago. It had barely been 2 weeks, but it felt like a lifetime. I suddenly felt silly for not leaving the town sooner. There was no reason to take his command to heart. The mountain and its base were safe. He kept them safe, even if the underlings were beneath them. Why would he care anyways? My heart skipped a beat as the dark thought flashed across my mind. He pretty much told me he didn't want me. Didn't want a mate. The king wanted space between us, so we couldn't grow close, so his enemies wouldn't have a way to hurt him. He wanted me locked up. So he wouldn't have to deal with me. The odd emotional bundle of chaos in my chest shattered at the notion. The nerves and panic that shot through me was strong enough to stop my tracks cold. I rubbed my fist into my chest to ease the blossoming pain. Then wouldn't it have been easier to reject me? I told him it would be okay, that I never expected to have a mate to begin with. Was this the universe's cruel way of punishing me for something I did in a past life, or my burden for holding the gold power? For the first time in a very long time, I felt pins prick my eyes. This feeling was horrible. I didn't ask for any of this, especially him. My heart stopped when a sudden low growl emitted from the dark trees surrounding me, and I took a step back in fear. That was not a snarl I was familiar with, or sent a pleasant feeling down my spine. I blinked rapidly out into the dark shadows of the woods, and gasped when a pair of dark golden eyes blinked back. The creature's white fangs flashed dangerously in the moonlight. My breath caught in my throat as I took another shaky step back. This was not the King of the North's wolf. Those golden eyes watched my every move, every breath that left my chest. It was unsettling. unnerving. There was nothing good swimming around his irises. It made my stomach clench in fright. I retreated further, and watched as those deep golden eyes narrowed. The growl that sounded from the beast shook me to my very bones, but I got the hint. Stay still. The dark wolf stepped forward, power and authority strumming through its lean body. It might not have been the king, but it was definitely a powerful, high-ranking wolf born. Its large body stood proudly as its brown fur reflected darkly off the light of the moon. I was so nervous I wanted to throw up. I never felt this much fear around the king. But one other wolf, born and I feared the very day I was born. Its eyes regarded me carefully as I stood stock still in the middle of the leering dark forest. There was no hope of escape if it wanted to kill me. It might have let me run a little ways, for the fun in it, but I wouldn't have made it back to the village alive. I watched with wide eyes as the wolf watched me, its dark gaze slowly rolling over my body, like they were judging me, seizing me up. It made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I didn't like it. W, what do you want? My voice sounded foreign with the hesitation ringing through it as I spoke against the silent background of the forest. The wolf's eyes snapped back to mine. I gulped. I wanted to turn and run for my life when its large body began to step out from the darkness of the trees. But I held my ground. I knew if I so much as turned it would pounce, and my throat would be clutched tightly in its large jaw. The wolf was big, but not quite as large as the king of the North. His fur was such a dark, rich brown that it could have easily been mistaken for black, and the golden stare stopped just inches away from my own. The beast was as tall as me. I gulped. I supposed venturing off on my own was such a good idea. He let out a hot breath of air that hit me straight in the face and made my nose scrunch up at its unpleasantness. I watched as amusement flashed through those dark eyes. Then the beast started to change right in front of me. Fur began to retract. Bones began to crack, to shift, and skin soon covered the wolf's body. The shifters in the village all changed so fluently, usually in a jump or leap, but nothing ever this brutal. I was both repulsed at the sound of breaking bone, and intrigued at the awe-inspiring sight. It wasn't long before I stood staring at one of the 6 men who sat before on that platform weeks before. A very large, very brooding, and very without clothes man. The worst part was that he didn't even try to hide himself. He stood barely 3 feet in front of me, showing off every inch of his large body, and stared down at me with calculating eyes. I looked at anywhere but him. W, who are you? Who are you? I asked after the silence around us became too deafening, and I doubted he would talk any time soon. Terriff, Delta of the Northern Kingdom and third in command of the Great King. Who are you? His voice was such a gruff growl that it caused the birds in the trees above to take flight in fear. What I wouldn't have given for wings then. I gulped again as those gold eyes narrowed into a look so dangerous it turned my blood cold. Immerse. I gave him a little bitty wave for good measure, but he only ignored it. I jumped when he suddenly bent forward and started sniffing around my head, like he was checking for some odor I hadn't cleaned away in my daily bath. What are you doing? Be quiet, child. He snarled before going back to sniffing at my hair. I tried not to pay too much attention to his actions, though, or his very without clothes body. I've never seen a nude male before, and I tried to shield my eyes as much as possible to keep it that way. But the brief glimpses I caught revealed unexpected extremities. Terriff pulled back a moment later with a curious look gracing his no longer brooding face. You smell like him. He mumbled softly as his dark gaze skimmed my face curiously. My eyebrows furrowed in confusion. I smell like who? My eyes widened and I shuddered at the seething look he sent me, before taking another unsteady step back. He took one forward. The Great King. You smell of him. I do. I frowned and lifted my hair to smell it myself, but only found the scent of my hair soap. I glanced up at him in confusion. He nodded and his eyes turned thoughtful once again, but he didn't say anything else. I wasn't sure how long he would be content with staring at me strangely, and I was afraid of the repercussions of trying to flee. What are you doing here? Wolf-borns don't come down this far without a reason. My voice trailed off as his eyes went hard once again. "That is none of your concern." His voice was an icy blade that cut easily through my resolve, and I took a quick step back as that cold demeanor once again fell over him. "Go now, fling, before I change my mind." And without another word, he leapt into the air and shifted once again back into that terrifying wolf. I ran all the way back to the village. Are you even listening to me? I blinked over at May's older brother in a daze as his dark eyes glared over at me. I mumbled as he slammed his bag shut and threw it on his single bed. Our home was bigger than most in the village, but the rooms were still awfully tiny and barely had room for a large bed. Even 𝐊𝐼𝐳𝐳, the town's leader, had a rather small living space. "You can't keep tuning everyone out. Kid'm starting to worry. You're always worrying," I said with a heavy sigh and finally dropped my feet from the window seat to turn to him. "But I know. I'm sorry. I've just been thinking a lot lately." "Indeed." I shrugged at the look he shot me before staring back out at the snow falling from the sky. It was the evening after my little run-in with the Great King's third in command, and my mind was still reeling from the encounter. What had he been doing there? Snooping around, looking for his next meal. But then the darker thoughts crept in. Like, did the king send him to watch me, to stalk me, to kill me? And then I would tell myself those were ridiculously theories. And if he wanted me dead, he would have done it himself a long time ago. I was only being dumb and naive. Just because he didn't want me with him didn't mean he wanted me dead. "We're leaving tomorrow morning. Are you even packed yet?" I smiled guiltily at him as he threw another bag onto his bed. "I didn't think so," he grumbled as I played with the rug underneath my feet. "Do I have to go?" I mumbled as the cold of the glass window pressed into my back. Leaving the village again for such a long period was not the best idea. I already left once, and that didn't have the best end result. Leaving the whole mountain for the winter, much less the village, without telling the king was not a good idea. Then again, he wouldn't even know. Probably wouldn't even care. Maybe getting away from those god-forsaken elders and their stupid examinations would be a nice change. "Yes, you have to go. We've already had this discussion." I know. "I'm sorry. You'll go pack." I groaned as I stood off the window seat with a heavy groan. The smile he shot me was more than enough to make me forget the stiff ache in my bones. He was the father figure I never had. Making him proud always made my heart soar. "Thank you, little cub. I will see you in the morning. Good night." I grumbled over my shoulder and shot him a wave before retreating back to my own room, my escort following silently behind me. The older guard never spoke, to me at least, and he always stayed 3 or 4 paces behind. I guess I could initiate a conversation first, but I'd rather not to talk to the person ensuring my freedom was short-lived. It didn't take long to pack what I usually needed for these annual trips, and since most of my clothing was made for northern weather, I had very little that would be sufficient enough for the lower kingdom. Yet, I always seemed to manage. It was late when I finally went to lay down for the night, the bright light of the full moon glowing serenely into my room, but I paused before reaching to blow out the candle. We would be gone for 2 moons at the least, and I couldn't ignore that nagging feeling in my chest any longer. I couldn't leave in the morning without telling the king somehow. I sighed and opened the drawer of the nightstand at the side of my bed. Even if he wouldn't care, I couldn't just leave. I grabbed a piece of paper and charcoal stick from the drawer and wrote a quick note down. No one would deliver this to his territory. No one dared cross into his land as I had, and I wasn't going back there anytime soon. I sipped on my snow shoes and checked to make sure the guard was sleeping outside my door before slipping out into the cool night air. This was the least I could do, and it wouldn't harm anyone. Even if the king never saw the note, or never came down again, I would feel better knowing I had tried. I didn't bother taking my time to enjoy the snow or the cool night air as I exited the village's gates and headed into the dark of the forest. The phantom path the king had taken me down all those nights before was etched into my mind, and I reached the spot sooner than expected. I paused for a moment and breathed in the refreshing air. I wished I could see him again before we left, See those lightning eyes that made my heart race? He said he couldn't stay away for long. That was 2 weeks not long enough. And now I would be gone all winter. I was starting to highly doubt I would ever see him again. And the knowledge made my heart ache. I let out a heavy sigh that turned into fog in the freezing air as I turned to the nearest tree. If he did care, and did find the note, at least I knew he wouldn't wonder where I had run off to. I reached for the string I placed in my cover's pocket and leaned up to tie it, then out tightly around the trunk. There, at least my part was done. I didn't even know his name. That was all I could think of as I started the cold, lonely walk back to the town. I was this hung up over him, and I didn't even know his name. Was this how the rest of my life would be? Wondering over if I would see him again. If we would ever be. I didn't even know his name. Chapter 6. The next morning was cold and dark. A few guards from the village helped 𝐊𝐢𝐳 and I down to the docks, but didn't stay long. The ship that waited patiently in the water once belonged to their parents, but after their death 𝐊𝐈 sold it to a family of merchants who traded around the ocean at the base of the mountain. They were kind enough to give us passage to the lower kingdom every year. We have a few minutes to spare if you and may want to walk around the shops, 𝐊𝐈 announced after he and the guards finished loading our bags. I shot him a smile. By ourselves. The guards had dispersed a few minutes before, and I was more than excited for my much-awaited freedom. He rolled his eyes before letting their dark gaze land on me. Yes, only for a minute or two. Be back shortly. Thanks, 𝐊𝐈 cheered before grabbing onto my hand and leading me over to the shops along the shore, front that were just now opening for the day. He laughed softly after us. This is just so exciting. She practically squealed as we walked along the displays sitting in front of the stores. I just love going to the lower kingdom. Don't you? I hate the snow. It's always so cold and wet. Oh, I stuttered when a large, cloaked figure suddenly bumped against my side. It was too early in the morning for the coastal villagers to be out and about, and there was more than enough room on the streets. There was no reason for someone to be that rude and walk so close. I grasped at my shoulder and snapped my gaze over to the culprit. Forgive me, my lady. It was a male voice, one masked by the heavy hood that blocked the stranger's face from view. I simply nodded as he gave me a soft bow before turning around and heading quickly in the opposite direction. How odd. 𝐸 are you okay? 𝐊𝐈 asked worriedly as I rubbed a nest and lead at my arm. Why, yeah. He just sort of surprised me. A flash of blue and a strong tug in my chest caused my breath to catch in my throat before the man disappeared around a corner and into the thick morning fog. My eyes widened. I'll be right back. I breathed out heavily, leaving 𝐊𝐈 staring dumbfounded 𝐿𝐼 after me. I followed the path of the cloaked stranger, the one who shot lightning blue eyes at me right before he turned. Perhaps I was just seeing things I desperately wished were there. But that part of me that seemed tied to the king was begging me to find out. There was no one there when I turned the corner, just a dark alley that led to a dead end. I frowned. I could have sworn I saw the man turn down here. I sighed and turned around. Great, great. Now my mind was making up fabrications of him. I was never going to be able to get him out of my head. I gasped when the cloaked figure from before suddenly flashed in front of me and gently forced me back into alley. Yes, gently, hey. A pair of blue eyes so bright they shone against the darkness of the morning caused my voice to freeze in the air. I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. All I could do was stare up at him at those eyes. In a daze like before, we stood there silently for a few moments, like we always seemed to do before anything really happened. The king blinked down at me, and despite the electricity surging through my veins at the sight of him, a thin shred of fear shone as well. His eyes turned dark. I saw your note. That voice. I knew it was his. I knew it belonged to him. But hearing outside of my dreams tore at my heart in so many disastrous ways. I didn't know if I would see you again before we left him. His eyes glanced away as he seemed to huddle further into the dark cloak. I frowned. He never broke eye contact with me first. Never really tried to hide them from me. I felt an odd, unfamiliar ache fill my chest. You are the one who bumped into me. I needed to get your attention discreetly. It was silent between us for a few long and rather unpleasant seconds after that. The silences from before were never this tense, this awkward. I enjoyed staring at his eyes silently, and he seemed to do the same with mine. This time, though, he seemed disappointed. You left the village. He spoke a moment later, and I didn't miss the dark, unhappy tone in his voice. I had to. You saw the note before today. You went out to place the note, and you went out the day before after I specifically told you not to. His voice came out as a low, dark growl that didn't hide how displeased he was with me at that moment. I frowned and pressed my hand flat against my stomach, like that would help the unpleasantness settling there. He was upset with me. Are you mad at me? My voice was soft and unsure as I blinked up at him, but he kept those beautiful eyes glanced away. Yes, my heart dropped painfully in my chest, and I sucked in a ragged breath, because I left the village. Of course. That's why he was mad at me, but it was like my moronic brain needed confirmation anyways. Needed to know for sure so I could reprimand myself for it later. He was mad at me. He grunted before finally bringing those spellbinding eyes back to mine. Our gazes locked again as his ginormous body loomed ominously over my smaller-on eyes. He growled again as that break gaze flashed. We stood there quietly for a while more, both of us gazing at the other. It felt like years before his eyes softened and his gloved hand slowly reached up to my hair. Tell me why you disobeyed. His command was soft as his silk-covered fingers played gently with a strand of my hair, his soul-shaking eyes following the action. But I knew he was silently demanding the answer. I wanted to close my eyes when he brushed that very same hand softly along my jaw, but I couldn't. His eyes wouldn't let me. Did that 𝐿𝐲 or whatever guy tell you? I asked with a tilt to my head as that hand brushed my hair over my shoulder. I enjoyed those little touches, enjoyed how his eyes followed the actions. I never wanted him to stop. Delta, and yes, that's his job. It's his job to tell you when I leave the village. I frowned up at him, but those blue eyes only narrowed. It's his job to do whatever I tell him. So yes, he clenched his jaw, but kept the gaze on mine as his fingers gripped a hold of my chin. My breath caught in my throat as he leaned my face towards his. Yes, why? To keep an eye on you. But why? You are my mate. Of course I'm going to have people watching you. He growled and let go of my chin to clench his fist at his side. I frowned at the action. He said you didn't want anyone to know about me. My generals are the exception, why? His dark growl suddenly filled the dark alley we were hidden in, and his blue eyes flashed dangerously. Stop asking that. It's annoying. I snapped my mouth shut and looked away as he leaned heavily against the brick building beside us. He wasn't wrong. I was just beyond curious about what went in that beautiful, hidden head of his. I'm sorry. I breathed out into the freezing air surrounding us. He let out a heavy sigh. Don't be. I shouldn't have snapped at you. I'm just not used to letting people ask so many questions. I gulped as those braided holes into the side of my face. I couldn't bring myself to look up at him, at that captivating gaze that held me hostage for seemingly days on end. I couldn't believe I honestly let myself talk so freely around him. Sure, he thought I was his mate, and who knows, maybe I really was. But that didn't give me permission to talk to him like he was what he was. 𝐴𝐾𝐿, the king, little wet, little one. He started softly as that gloved hand reached up and rubbed gently over my cheek. I tried not to push my face into his touch and hold him there forever, but it was honestly quite hard. I am truly sorry. Don't be upset with me. Don't be upset with him. The king of the north, this situation was more than odd. I trust my generals, with my life and with yours. Otherwise, they wouldn't be my generals. They are the only ones who know. I could only nod as his gloved fingers brushed gently over my cheek. Your note said you are going to the lower kingdom. He started softly as his hand dropped down to his side once more. I tried not to frown in disappointment. I thoroughly enjoyed his warm touch, even if it was through a glove. You failed to mention how long. My eyes flickered to his. Would he really care how long I would be gone? The look in his bright orbs said he did. But did it honestly matter? How did he come by the note so fast anyways? Had he finally come down the mountain the night before to see me? Or did his general bring it to him? We leave for the lower kingdom every year, usually for a few moons at least, until the heavy snow fades. I watched as that dark look washed over his bright eyes once again, and he rubbed at the hood hiding his face. Until winter ends. His voice came out as a low grumble as it flowed easily over my shoulders. I wanted to close the few inches separating us, and bury into the no doubt thick and warm lapels of his cloak. Then a whole new wave of sadness washed over me. Until winter ends. I wouldn't see him again until winter ended. Before I had been worried about him wanting to see me again. And now I was truly starting to fear the fact that I wouldn't for the next 2 or 3 moons. I cannot allow it. What? I asked in surprise and blinked up at him with wide eyes. I cannot allow you to leave. You shouldn't even be outside of your village right now. The soft ease in his voice was gone and replaced with a dangerous growl as that gloved hand of his suddenly gripped onto the top of my arm. I don't have a choice. I whispered as his grip tightened and his eyes flashed. No, you don't. You're going back now. No, I don't have a choice to stay. 𝐊𝐿𝐲 is my guardian, and he says we must go. I tried to tug my arm out of his grasp, even though I didn't want to. I enjoyed the way the warmth of his hand surged through the glove and into my skin. His grip tightened. I'm your king, and your mate. You do what I say, you don't want me. I snapped as my temper spiked, and his grip loose and enough for me to tear my arm from. I dropped my eyes as his widened. You don't. And until that changes, I have to listen to 𝐿𝐴. Besides, I mumbled and licked my lips as those lightning orbs glared holes into the side of my head. I can't stay there anymore. All I do is sit through examination after examination as they poke and prod at me and force me to drink those funny-colored medications. I need a break from it all. I tried to give him a reassuring smile, but I still couldn't meet his eyes that I was sure were dimmed in a frown. What are they doing to you? The dark snarl in his voice surprised me, and the firm grip he suddenly held on my chin forced my eyes up to his. I shuddered at the dangerous look passing through his gaze, one that made my stomach twist and almost fear. I gulped. They don't know why the gold power tried to kill me, why it wants you so much. So they keep testing to me to see. It wants me because you want me. Do those fucking underlings have no idea how the concept of mates or power works? They'll burn them all. He snarled and his blue eyes flashed as he began to turn away from me, but I gripped onto his arm before he could. No, don't. They're just scared. They don't know what's wrong with me and they are worried for their safety. Don't blame them for their fear. I will blame them for hurting you. He growled and the sharp fangs of his wolf flashed, but he didn't rip his arm from my grip like I half expected him to. I eased it closer to my body. His eyes were dark in anger as they glanced over me, and even though the angry king was rather frightening, my heart soared at how he wanted to defend me. I gave him a small smile. They haven't hurt me, just made me very uncomfortable. I'm okay, I promise. I was practically hugging his arm by then, but he didn't seem to mind. He even took a closer step towards me. There is nothing wrong with you, little underling. I watched as the anger slowly faded from his lightening eyes. All I could do was stare in wonder. Mate or not, eyes like that shouldn't exist. That the power is magic formed in souls of worth. How ignorant is your culture? The question was rhetorical and he rolled his eyes as I slowly let go of his arm. Immerse. Where are you? 𝐴's voice called from the fog of the street and I jumped when it reached my ears. The king raised an eyebrow at me. Your name is Immerse. There was a small smile pulling at his lips as my eyes flickered between him and the foggy street my friend was looking for me on. Yes, did your general not tell you that? I asked hesitantly and fidgeted with my hands as 𝐴 called again. No, he failed to mention that. His voice was a dark grumble as his gaze flickered behind me. That's my friend. I should probably go before they start to worry. No. His voice shook through me as his large hand reached out and gripped along my upper arm once again. I was serious before. I don't want you leaving. I stared up at him with wide, pleading eyes, but his never wavered. But I have to alone. I don't want you leaving alone. I will talk to this 𝐊𝐿𝐺 of yours and have one of my generals go with you. My heart dropped to my stomach in disappointment. For a moment there, just a moment, I thought he was going to go with me, but of course he lost. He was a king, the king of the North. He had more important matters to deal with than following some silly girl around the lower kingdom all winter. All right? I nodded reluctantly as he let go of my arm and began to turn. You know, I called after him and watched as he slowly turned back to me with questioning eyes. I don't even know your name. The light in his eyes slowly faded and he tore his beautiful gaze away from mine. That is for the best. His voice was dark once again as it filled the alley surrounding us. I frowned as his gaze glanced back down the street. May was still looking for me on. How is not knowing your name for the best? I swear I won't go running down the mountain screaming it to whoever passes by. The corners of his mouth twitched up at that, and he let his beautiful eyes glance back over to me. You know mine. It's only fair. He raised one dark, beautiful eyebrow at that and I felt blushing as he brought his full attention back to me. I cannot tell you my real name for your safety, not because I don't want to but. I urged hopefully as his blue eyes flickered around carefully. My council calls me North. I raised an incredulous eyebrow at him, but he just lowered his in confusion. North, yes. Your own council doesn't even know your real name. It hasn't been necessary. I'm not calling you that. He crossed those beautiful thick arms over his chest with a scoff. Then call me king. I think I deserve a name to call you by other than your title. Any name. It doesn't even have to your first, as long as it's not North. I murmured against the silence surrounding us. He grunted and his bright eyes turned amused as they stared down at me curiously. You think you get special treatment because you're my mate? His tone would have suggested otherwise. But just by the few things 𝐊𝐺 slipped out about his culture and the way 𝐊𝐺 acted around me so far, I could tell mates were more than yes. His eyes flashed darkly for a moment, and his face turned serious before he walked slowly back over to me. I stiffened as he leaned down until his mouth was nearly pressed against my ear, like he was afraid the ghosts in the alley would hear. I was almost engulfed completely in his cloak. Eric, king forever. How convenient. Is that your first name? I asked softly as he slowly pulled away from me, his full lips just barely touching my cheek. I gasped as the light touch sent electricity straight through my body. He let out another dark chuckle. No, but it's as close to one that you are getting. I tried not to let the frown tugging on my lips dampen my whole mood, and his dark chuckle gently eased the tension on my shoulders. Run along to your little friend, while I find that boy I gave you back on the mountain. I assume that is 𝐊𝐿𝐺. Yes, I nodded as he turned again and headed once more for the street. I followed slowly after him until I reached the alley's entrance and saw May searching for me at the end of the road. And Immerse. My heart jumped as my name passed his lips. That voice alone was enough to make my head spin. But when he used it to say my name, it made everything in me freeze. I glanced back over at him with questioning eyes. The lightning blue of his flashed as he stared over at me in a dark gaze. Don't ever think that I don't want you. My breathing ceased at his words, and all I could do was stare at him with wide eyes as he turned on his heel and headed for the ship waiting for us at the docks. And take me with you. But he wouldn't, and I doubted he ever would.